When 19-year-old Tyler Washington stepped up to the Family Feud podium with his walker and said 3 words that would redefine strength, nobody in the studio knew they were about to witness the most powerful survival story ever shared on television. But it wasn't just what he said that stopped Steve Harvey cold. It was the way he said it, with the quiet certainty of someone who had stared death in the face and discovered that living is a choice that requires courage every single day. The cameras kept rolling, but this wasn't entertainment anymore. This was the moment when America met its youngest warrior, proving that sometimes the greatest victories happen when you're fighting just to stay alive. Tuesday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta began with an energy that felt different from typical tapings. The Washington family from Detroit faced off against the Martinez family from San Diego. But there was something about Tyler Washington that immediately commanded attention, not because of the walker he used to navigate the stage, but because of the presence he carried, a gravity that seemed impossible for someone his age. Tyler Washington, 19 years old with short brown hair and eyes that held depths that spoke of experiences beyond his years, stood at the family podium, using a sleek silver walker that had become as much a part of him as his own shadow. Next to him stood his mother, Patricia Washington, 47, a schoolteacher whose protective stance couldn't quite mask the fierce pride in her eyes as she watched her son simply existing in defiance of medical predictions. Completing the Washington family were Tyler's father, David, 50, a construction supervisor who had learned to measure success not in projects completed, but in days his son was alive to see, and Tyler's younger sister, Maya, 16, whose obvious adoration of her older brother spoke of someone who had witnessed extraordinary courage up close. What the studio audience couldn't see was the journey that had brought him to this moment. 2 years earlier, Tyler had been a typical 17-year-old high school senior, star of the debate team, planning for college, looking forward to a future that seemed limitless. Then came the headaches that wouldn't respond to medication, the vision problems that made reading difficult, and finally the seizure that had changed everything. The diagnosis had been devastating: glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor that typically carried a prognosis measured in months rather than years. At 17, Tyler had found himself facing medical terminology that most people never have to learn, treatment options that all carried significant risks, and statistics that suggested his 18th birthday might be more milestone than anyone wanted to acknowledge. The surgery to remove as much of the tumor as possible had been successful beyond expectations, but it had come with costs Tyler was still learning to navigate. The tumor's location had affected his motor functions, leaving him with balance issues and weakness on his left side that made walking without assistance dangerous. But perhaps the most profound change had been in Tyler's perspective on life itself. The year of treatment that followed had been a masterclass in resilience. Chemotherapy that left Tyler exhausted, radiation treatments that required precise positioning while managing mobility limitations, endless medical appointments that had replaced the college visits he'd planned. Tyler had missed his senior year of high school, watching his classmates graduate while he fought for the chance to see his 20th birthday. But Tyler had also discovered strength he hadn't known he possessed. He had learned to advocate for himself in medical settings, to ask hard questions about prognosis and treatment options. Most importantly, he had learned that survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about choosing to live fully despite limitations and uncertainty. The Family Feud opportunity had come through Maya, Tyler's sister, who had submitted their application with a note that revealed the family's journey. "My brother is alive when doctors said he wouldn't be, and he's living more fully than most people who've never faced death." During family introductions, Steve had approached them with his characteristic warmth, though Tyler's walker and the family's protective dynamic immediately suggested a story that went deeper than typical family bonds. "The Washington family from Detroit. Y'all ready to play some Family Feud?" Patricia stepped forward as the family spokesperson. "We're absolutely ready, Steve. This is my son Tyler, my husband David, and our daughter Maya." Steve approached Tyler with respectful curiosity. "Tyler, good to see you here, young man. You excited about being on the show?" Tyler's smile was genuine and unguarded. "Yes, sir, Mr. Harvey. This is probably the most normal thing I've done in 2 years, and I'm loving every minute of it." Something in the way Tyler emphasized normal, with a gratitude that suggested he understood how precious ordinary experiences could be, caught Steve's attention. The game progressed well through the first 4 rounds. Tyler had buzzed in twice, giving thoughtful answers that showed both intelligence and a perspective that seemed unusually mature for someone his age. During commercial breaks, production assistants noticed the family's careful attention to Tyler's needs without making them obvious. Patricia would check his fatigue level with subtle glances. David stayed positioned to provide support if needed. Maya would engage Tyler in conversation that kept his spirits up without being overwhelming. But it was during the fifth round that everything changed. The category that appeared on the board seemed straightforward. Name something that makes you stronger. Tyler had been selected to answer, his first time approaching the podium alone throughout the entire game. He moved forward with the careful coordination of someone who had learned to navigate physical limitations with grace. Steve read the question with his usual enthusiasm, expecting typical responses about exercise, family support, or life experience. Tyler, here we go. Name something that makes you stronger. Tyler looked back at his family, who were watching with the kind of supportive attention that comes from understanding that every public moment carried the weight of representing survival against impossible odds. When he spoke, his voice was clear but carried a weight that seemed to encompass 2 years of fighting for his life. Almost dying. The studio fell completely silent, not the brief pause of audience consideration, but the profound quiet that comes when people suddenly understand they have just heard something that redefines everything they thought they knew about strength. Steve's mouth fell slightly open. In decades of hosting, he had heard thousands of answers, but nothing like this. Something in Tyler's tone told him this was more than an unusual game show response. Almost dying, Steve repeated slowly. Tyler nodded, his composure steady despite the weight of what he was about to share. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with brain cancer, Mr. Harvey, glioblastoma. The doctors gave me maybe 6 months to live. But here I am, 19 years old and still fighting. The revelation hit the studio like a physical force. The audience sat in stunned silence as they processed what they were hearing from someone who looked like he should be worrying about college exams rather than mortality. Fighting cancer at 17 changes everything. Tyler continued, his voice growing stronger. You learn that every day you wake up is a victory. You learn that complaining about small problems is a waste of the time you might not have. You learn that being alive is a privilege, not a guarantee. Steve Harvey found himself completely off script. This wasn't just a teenager sharing a difficult experience. This was a cancer survivor demonstrating what it means to transform trauma into wisdom, survival into strength. Tyler, Steve said gently, walking closer to where he stood at the podium, tell me about your fight. What happened next would transform the show entirely. Tyler straightened slightly, drawing on reserves of strength that had carried him through chemotherapy, radiation, and the daily uncertainty of living with cancer. I had a brain tumor called glioblastoma. Surgery, chemo, radiation, the whole works. The tumor affected my motor functions, which is why I use this walker now. He gestured to his walker with matter-of-fact acceptance. But you know what I learned, Mr. Harvey? This walker doesn't make me weak. It makes me mobile. These scars don't make me ugly. They make me a survivor. This experience didn't ruin my life. It taught me how to live it. The studio was completely silent. Even the production crew had stopped their usual activity, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented, a teenager teaching a studio full of adults about courage and resilience. I missed my senior year of high school, Tyler continued. Missed graduation, missed prom, missed all the things 17-year-olds think matter. But I gained something more valuable. I gained perspective on what actually matters. Behind him, Patricia was crying openly, not from sadness but from overwhelming pride in the young man her son had become through circumstances no parent should have to witness. What matters is being here, Tyler said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak about life and death. What matters is loving the people around you while you can. What matters is finding meaning in every day, because you never know how many days you're going to get. Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of shows, found himself facing something he had never encountered. This wasn't just a cancer survivor sharing his story. This was a 19-year-old philosopher who had learned life's most important lessons through the hardest possible experience. Tyler, Steve said softly, what do you want people to know about what you've been through? Tyler paused, considering the question with the care of someone who understood that words carry weight. I want them to know that having cancer doesn't make you brave automatically, but choosing to keep fighting, choosing to find meaning in the struggle, choosing to help other people going through the same thing, that's where the courage comes in. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I want them to know that this walker isn't a symbol of what I've lost. It's a symbol of how far I'm willing to go to keep living. Every step I take with it is a victory over the tumor that tried to stop me from walking at all. Steve felt tears forming in his own eyes as he listened to this young man redefine strength in ways that challenged every assumption about what it means to overcome adversity. "Stop the clocks," Steve called out, his voice carrying across the studio with unprecedented authority. "Stop everything." The game show timers froze, the music cut out, the audience held its collective breath. Steve walked to the center of the stage, positioning himself so he could address the entire studio while staying close to Tyler. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve began, "we just heard from someone who has faced death and chosen life, who has encountered the worst that can happen and found the best in themselves." He gestured toward Tyler. "This young man has been through something that would break most adults, and he's standing here teaching us about strength, about perspective, about what it really means to be grateful for being alive." "Tyler Washington," Steve said, turning to face him directly, "you are 19 years old, and you have more wisdom, more courage, more understanding of what life is really about than most people develop in a lifetime. You didn't just survive cancer. You let cancer teach you how to live." Tyler was emotional now, but his tears were mixed with relief, the relief of having his experience acknowledged, his growth recognized, his perspective valued. Steve walked closer to Tyler. "And I need everyone in this studio and everyone watching at home to understand something. This young man could have let cancer make him bitter, angry, defeated. Instead, he let it make him wise, grateful, strong." Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal business card. "Tyler," he said, "this has my personal phone number on it. Because what you just shared with us isn't just personal testimony. It's teaching that could change how people think about their own problems, their own blessings, their own lives." But Steve wasn't done. He began removing his suit jacket, the gesture that had become his signature in moments of profound connection. "This jacket," Steve said, approaching Tyler carefully and draping it around his shoulders while he maintained his grip on his walker, "goes home with someone who has redefined what strength looks like, someone who has shown us that the most powerful people aren't the ones who never fall down. They're the ones who get back up and keep walking, even when walking is harder than it used to be." Steve turned to address the entire studio again. "You know what we're going to do? We're going to finish this game, and the Washington family is going to win, because Tyler has already shown us what winning looks like. Winning looks like waking up every day and choosing to live fully, even when life doesn't go according to plan." As the show concluded, Steve made an unprecedented announcement. His foundation would provide full college scholarships for Tyler, ensuring that the education he'd had to postpone for cancer treatment could be pursued without financial barriers. But the most powerful moment came when Steve addressed Tyler directly, one final time. "Tyler," he said, "I want you to look right into that camera and tell every young person watching who's facing something that seems impossible that they can get through it." Tyler looked directly into the main camera, his 19-year-old voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak about overcoming the impossible. "To everyone who's fighting something that feels bigger than they are," he said, "I want you to know that you're stronger than you think. Cancer tried to kill me, but it ended up teaching me how to live. Whatever you're facing, it doesn't have to defeat you. It can make you stronger, wiser, more grateful for every day you get." Behind the cameras, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Crew members who had worked on hundreds of episodes found themselves profoundly moved by this teenager's wisdom and resilience. As the show concluded, cancer survivors in the studio audience began approaching Tyler to share their own stories of survival, of learning to live with uncertainty, of finding strength in the fight for life. Tyler's courage in sharing his experience had created a community of warriors who understood that survival is just the beginning of the story. The episode that aired 10 weeks later became one of the most inspiring in Family Feud history. The response was overwhelming. The show received over 250,000 messages from viewers, many from cancer patients and survivors, sharing their own stories of finding strength in survival. Steve Harvey said in interviews that Tyler's episode changed how he understood both strength and perspective. "I met a young man that day who had been through hell and come back with heaven's perspective," he explained. Tyler Washington is now 20, attending Wayne State University on a full scholarship, studying psychology with plans to work with young cancer patients. He speaks regularly at hospitals and support groups, sharing his message that survival is just the beginning of the story. The business card Steve gave him sits framed on his desk, representing the moment when his private battle became a public inspiration, when his personal transformation became a universal lesson about finding strength in struggle. Every year on his rebirth day, the anniversary of his cancer diagnosis, Tyler posts a photo on social media with a simple message: 2 years ago, cancer tried to end my story. Instead, it taught me how to write it better. Every day above ground is a good day. The lesson Tyler Washington taught that Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta is profound. Strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, learning from the fall, and using that knowledge to help others who are fighting their own battles. And sometimes it takes a 19-year-old cancer survivor with a walker and an oversized suit jacket to remind a television studio full of people that the most powerful victories happen when you're fighting just to stay alive, and that almost dying can teach you more about living than a lifetime of easy days ever could. Because that's what real strength looks like. That's what earned wisdom sounds like. And that's what happens when a game show becomes a platform for understanding that some of the strongest people on earth are the ones who've stared death in the face and decided that living, really living, is worth fighting for every single day.